But is voting the only component? I mean, you had Turkey a few weeks ago. There's an elected government with a large majority. The people took to the streets against it. In Britain, in the war in Iraq, before the war in Iraq, a lot of people took to the streets. They say it's my democratic right to protest. You come to Speaker's Corner every week and you recognise the right to speak. So democracy is not just about crossing a piece of paper. It's also about a series of rights within a society to be able to affect and change outcomes organised by others.
Yeah.
They never change.
I don't think
but I mean, last week we saw the protest in Egypt. In a period of 4 days, it's estimated about 70 to 20 million people took place in demonstrations. So, is this an expression of democratic will? I mean, it's probably, I don't know the exact figure, but a lot of people are talking, it's probably the biggest demonstration in human history. And it's not just Egypt, is it? You had Egypt, Turkey, Brazil, you've had other countries as well, where large protests have shaped the fate of events.
Yes.
So isn't that part of democracy, that you can do that?
I think people have to feel wish to, have to want to. That's point one.
Yeah, but I mean, voting is one thing,
yes.
Right? Crossing a piece of paper is one. I accept that's a component of democracy, but it is not democracy. Democracy is much wider than crossing a piece of paper.
Oh, definitely.
So I'm saying that what happened in Egypt is democracy as well. That is millions of people expressing their will and demanding a change. That is a revolutionary democracy, but it's democracy nevertheless. Just it's not parliamentary democracy. It's a revolutionary democracy, the will of the people expressing itself and finding its realization. I mean, okay, the state intervened, the army intervened. Why do you think they intervened? Peace? Keeping the peace. To keep power, yeah. I mean, ultimately, 30 to 40% of the economy of Egypt is owned by the army, or run by the army. And so, if the masses take to the streets and don't get their demands met, and they come out in such large numbers, the danger from the point of view of the army is, what if the people demand the overthrow? The government says use the army goes in and can't attack the people, then the army disappears, disintegrates. And so therefore, the army command had to think in advance, if we lose our army and they side with the masses, then we have no more power of economy, wealth, power, privilege and all the rest of it. And so they intervene to maintain some semblance of authority over the revolutionary movement. But it is...
Well, Egypt has always had a sort of autocratic sort of history for the last 100 years. Saddam was a dictator, really. And that's it's not used to, it's used to accepting power from the centre.
And until the point is, my argument is the opposite of that. The argument is that here we have the mass of people, millions and millions of people expressing themselves in a much more profoundly determined sense than going to cross a piece of paper in the local school every 5 years. This is a profound awakening of the people as to what their rights should be and how they can stamp their impact upon society. And so here, what you're actually having in Egypt, peculiarly enough, is a more democratic system than we have here, because the will of the people is more active. If you have a passive people, you can have all the democratic rights in the world and they don't do anything with it. You know, how many people get out to Speaker's Corner? You've got the right to speak. How many people get out to speak? Nobody. You know, 5 nutcases and a communist, that's it. You know, that's Speaker's Corner. So, how do you find that expression of the masses unless you have some awakening, some cause for it?
Well, I think it's a sort of once a group phenomenon, some of it is a group phenomenon, indicating that something's wrong somewhere, but they haven't yet found
Why would a group phenomena of that character jump from one culture to another? If you like, let's take the Arab Spring, the Occupy movements, the protests in Brazil, in Turkey, in Egypt now. Don't they have certain similarities in the character in which the events are taking place?
There is a sort of unemployed youth, which is the backbone of all.
Well, that's part of some of the protests. It's not actually the general rule. They tend to be quite. For example, Brazil and Turkey were generally educated young people. Some unemployed, but most of them were educated. So unemployment's a component. In which case you got a direct economic connection.
Also, you have educated people who don't see a future for themselves, but who want a future.
Right. Okay.
That's what they want. They want some sort of idea.
So what is that an indicator of?
The fact that they don't have an idea.
They don't have what?
They don't have direction or an idea.
Yeah, I mean their ideal is to get a job and get on in life, right?
But that's not the sufficient idea.
No, but it's certainly, if a significant layer of the population, particularly as you're saying, the educated population and so on, if they're unable to fulfill their dreams, or they feel that society, government, state, whatever, is unable to incorporate the realization, at least in some way or other, of their dreams, and that people take to the streets demanding that these dreams be part of the structure of power, that they be incorporated into the planning and organization of society, then this is a profound alienation from a significant layer of society who are necessary for its reproduction. If they are taken to the streets, that's why I say these are revolutionary events taking place.
I think they are, and I think what they see is only at one level. They only see a level. They don't see any form of ascent or purpose to their lives.
The majority,
and however sophisticated and clever the institutions that these new constitutions create, doesn't always bear real feelings. They feel that it's been imposed from outside. And if you want direction, there are only two ways to achieve direction. One is through war, and one is through post-war. Post-war, you don't worry about direction because you know you have to rebuild everything.
What is a revolution?
A revolution.
I mean,
it can
because
involve,
you mentioned war.
A revolution is something that happens which promotes or causes war, or as part of the post-war reconstruction. That's a revolution.
If you draw an analogy between war between nations and internal social conflict, you could reasonably say that a revolution is an internal war in society between different forces within the society to change the society or to hold it as it is. So that's why I think you see in Egypt the millions of people take to the streets and a battle breaks out between different forces. And there was talk that if the army wouldn't intervene, there'd be a civil war. Well, there actually is a civil war already. There is already a civil war. The army is intervening in that civil war to try and control the direction in which it takes, because the army is fearful that the revolutionary movement will demand more than the army can tolerate. Because the army itself is a mirror of the existing structure of society. Its institutions and hierarchy.
They're trying to prevent the civil war.
They're trying to maintain the wealth and power of the elite. And the wealth and power of the elite, a significant section of that wealth and power, is connected directly with the military power and the history of military power. I mean, Hosni Mubarak was the military's representative, if you like. And when Mubarak fell, the military took over. When the parliamentary elections took place, the military dissolved the parliamentary elections. When Morsi was in power, the military came to an agreement with him. Now the masses take to the street, the military remove him. Because they want to maintain their fundamental baseline of power that is the root of capitalist exploitation in Egypt. But the problem is, the masses see the intervention of the army as an intervention on behalf of the revolution, That's how they had to present themselves. The army had to present itself as a revolutionary force. So to reconstruct its image in order to gain a little bit of leeway to try and create a new balance of power at the leadership. That's the idea they've got. It was interesting. I think you were here about a year ago or a few months ago when we were discussing Egypt, and then I said I was speaking against Morsi, and some people turned around in the meeting and they said, oh well, if he does that, if he does what you say, then they will remove him. And I thought, oh yeah, you try. But actually, that's what happened. You know, the masses came on the streets, they removed him. So,
but the
awakening.
He didn't hear anything. He was told, you need to come halfway. You need to compromise. They haven't heard it.
But if you get sufficient millions on the streets,
Yes.
all bets are off.
Yes.
A mass movement can remove any government anywhere on earth.
Yes.
And actually, when the opportunity for revolution occurs, layers of the leadership will immediately stab the other leader in the back. I mean, if David Cameron was confronted by a demonstration of 5 million, David Cameron will be out, and someone else will say, "Oh no," Boris Johnson will suddenly say, "I support the demonstration." He'll turn up on a Boris bike, stand in Trafalgar Square, and swear he always hated David Cameron, and he just never let it. He hated him actually since college, and it'll all come out. Right, and if he manages to remove him and then speak the words of the revolution, repeat them, then of course he gains a temporary moment of authority, unless the masses have already got their own leadership created in the process of revolutionary construction. So one element of that is that the people who led the movement, which brought down Morsi in the last week, actually most of them are the same people who led the movement that started in 2011, who were secular revolutionaries, but they don't have authority amongst the mass of the population. They have authority in the sense that they can mobilize demonstrations. They don't have authority as a revolutionary ideology, because history weighs on people like a giant burden.
Do you believe that they're right in thinking that Morsi let them down?
Well,
but that's what they say.
Let them down is a subjective question. Are they right? Yes, they think they've been let down, so they are right. They've been let down.
I think what happened he was a representative of the Muslim political Islam, and everything he pushed in was political Islam agenda. When he was told, look, don't do it, because they were well organized, they had petrodollars and everything, to give people money, people would elect anything Morsi wanted. They would approve anything.
Money and bread.
Yes. And the elites were telling, look, these things that you're doing are not the right, or not approved by the people, and you need to really compromise women's rights, workers' rights, and all this. And he was saying, look, I have been elected, I had a majority, I'm going to see through all the change.
Do you think that, sorry to
And
interrupt,
that's what brought him down.
sorry to interrupt, but do you think that Hadi is more proactive in women's rights and workers' rights?
But then he loses his own support.
Then he might lose his own support.
Yes.
Then they go to the was it Al-Noor?
Yes.
Al-Noor, a more fundamentalist
It's
group.
interesting because Al-Noor is preparing itself to be in the leadership.
The story
That's
was
what-
today that they were gonna choose this guy El Bari, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, he was the BBC reporter, and the official sources said they would appoint him, who was considered to be a liberal in Western views. But then Al-Noor opposed him, so that the more fundamentalist group of Islam, political Islam, opposed the appointment, and the army had to take account of that. So really the question is, why is the balance of forces in Egyptian society unable to tolerate the will of the masses, or to accommodate the will of the masses?
The higher the group aspirations were, the higher they were, the more they expected to achieve the leaders that they are. So whilst he was trying to be compromising, that wasn't sufficient. The higher.
The question is this: if a revolution happens, it happens because the internal contradictions within a society are extremely tense.
Yes.
That means that those contradictions cannot be resolved just by discussions.
No, they can't.
You can either wear people out. I mean, like if my brother goes fishing, you go fishing, you get a big fish. You stand there, you're pulling on the fish. You have to, maybe your line only can take 10 pounds. You pull in a 100-pound fish. So you've got to play it. Let it loose, let it run, pull it a little bit, let it loose, let it run. That's how the politics of power seek to control the masses. But if the masses are really mobilized and determined, any government can fall in a day. You know, the army could fall in 3 days' time. Then one mistake, millions could be on the streets. The army could be overthrown, or the military leadership given. That's why the military leadership, they know it's a hot potato.
Yes.
Ideally, they must get rid of it as quickly as possible.
Well, what would you do? You want to gas 30 million or 1 million? If you have to gas people, who would you gas? The 1 million or the 30 million?
The question is, how if they have to hold, they want to hold power.
Yes.
The army in Egypt is a huge force. It's got enormous economic power. It's like 1/3 or 40% of the economy. It's a huge economic power. So they all have an interest in maintaining that power. If they think the masses are demanding too much and that the government can tolerate, the government will be overthrown, well then there's only the military barely exposed as the rulers. And so they'd prefer always to have a barrier in between. Not us, it's him. You know, he is the official. You elected him, he's no good, we'll take him. But then the army in the background still remains there, controlling its economic forces, reorganizing whatever it needs to reorganize to reform itself and stay in power. An army is the core of a state. State is based around armed bodies of men in defense of the existing property relations in society.
You know what happened in Egypt? The Brotherhood were talking to junior officials, and the army leader, when he got that information, he told them, look, any communication from the president's staff and the army should be through the control and command system. And Morsi called a guy who was divisional leader of the army. He said, look, I can't give these people an inch. If I give them an inch, they'll ask for a yard. I'm elected. You know, if you guys throw me out, I'm going to be in trouble with the world. You really need to support me. Sisi has to go and put you in there, or tell him, you know, has to really back me and come here. There's a joint press release. Morsi said, army official there, Sisi to be there, and him to say, look, you guys calm down, then we'll send you one thing. The army was saying no. Well, the guy told him in the plane, he said, look, you want to destroy Egypt.
You see, the other side to this question is a historical question about the dynamics inside the army.
Yes.
The army is composed
It's a family.
It's composed on the one side of an elite who own a significant section of the economy and control key levers of power. On the other side, it's composed of ordinary soldiers.
Yes.
And the ordinary soldiers are close, their brothers and sisters are on the demonstrations.
Yes.
So, because of this, had Morsi said, army, shoot the protesters, the army would have split.
Yes.
A section of the army would have gone over to the side of the revolution, then there would have been an armed revolution.
Yes.
And so, to prevent that, better the head of Morsi rather than the army internally
Splitting.
breaking apart, and then the elite have no more control over the military itself. Then the army will rise up against the army, and there will only be an elite suspended in midair.
It is very interesting because the same thing happened in Syria.
Well,
you know, the Syrian opposition were given money to get army officers on their side.
Yeah.
And to this day, you can count how many Syrian army men defected. Bearing in mind that Assad is a minority, and most of the army are Sunnis, and the people who are uprising are supposed to be Sunnis. How many army officers came to the opposition side?
This is the interesting point about this question, because a lot of people were arguing, oh, Islam's coming to power in the whole of the Middle East, and this is the wave that's going to end. Look where it's all ended up, this revolution. Actually, the interesting phenomena that we're seeing now is this, that the social questions are coming back to the fore.
Yes,
because these are global questions.
Bread,
and these questions about bread, economics, wealth, workers' wages, rights, these questions are primary questions because of the demographic transformation. Careful.
Khubz in Arabic, they were saying khubz, meaning bread.
Let's put it the right location. That's a location.
I didn't know you were a technician.
Not really.
We had it in the right
Yeah, you knocked it off, you scoundrel. It's all right, watch out.
You don't think the Middle East to be better, like our checks down there? Do you think that the Middle East is Israel controlled?
I mean, what we are seeing is the emergence of the masses as the decisive force in shaping events.
Yes.
That's certainly the case. And then within that process, you have rulers who attempt to manipulate the movement and control the movement to maintain their authority and power.
I don't think
When Nasser came to power, or Gaddafi came to power, the army split, and the lower layers amongst the army, a layer of junior officers began to raise social demands and make revolutionary changes.
Yes.
And that potentially, of course, is still in the air. It's not as an ideology yet,
Yes.
but it's latent there because those are the demands that will connect with the masses, if you like. This concept of social rights, social demands, wages, conditions.
I don't think the masses this time sort of said, let's go to this square and shout around a bit, and then the army will intervene and take it and remove it. I don't think they had that as. I don't think they expected that.
No, they didn't. But I mean, there may be some people in the army who thought they might be able to do that. The question is, if nobody really expected last week that 17 million people or 30 million would take to the streets. Nobody expected that. Why did so many people take to the streets? Well, it's quite clear. Conditions is one issue, but it's also quite clear that people are witness to a global process.
Yes.
They saw Turkey, they saw Brazil. People are watching these things.
Yes.
And then the potential for spontaneous increasing protests seems to take on a certain roller coaster effect. It rolls on and takes on an impetus of its own.
Yes.
And that dynamic is what we're beginning to see. And I wouldn't have expected myself with Egypt.
But
I didn't expect it.
It's funny enough.
Sorry. Will it spread to the west? I think it will spread to the west.
Yes.
Just be careful.
If conditions
I think
continue
it will spread to the west.
here in the United Kingdom, I believe there will be Tahrir Square here.
I think that is true. I think what we're seeing is the same. Be careful, be careful, careful.
Oh, yes, I will be careful. I didn't realise you meant that.
Yeah, no, I do mean it.
The legs are very.
The dynamic of discontent with official democratic politics does exist. The problem is, at the moment, it's still manipulated. People still live in this world where television will talk to you about your rights, get you on telly, and someone can argue.
We are all in it.
Well, yeah, but then you'll have angry politicians stumping their hand on the table and saying how bad things are, getting a big round of applause.
Yes.
And you've got a lot of bread and circuses in England as well.
Yes.
And so, consequence of that is, as long as people are doing okay-ish or surviving, then relative stability can exist for a long time until the accumulated discontent about many things finds a form of expression and explodes. And at that moment, I think what we're seeing in Egypt is perfectly possible in countries like America or Britain or European countries. Some European countries have already seen the beginnings.
Spain and Italy.
Well,
Yes.
I think in Harold Wilson's time, as you know, the army almost intervened then.
Yeah, but that we're not talking about army intervention.
Well, no,
army intervention.
But they wanted to remove him, didn't they?
Yeah, but the question is about revolutionary movement. The potential for social, economic, political unrest that takes on such a scale that the old regime begins to crumble. One political leader after another falls from power. Potentially you can have army intervention, but this is a specific case in Egypt.
In this country you might not have army intervention. The politicians might step down. They might call an early election.
Of course. They have a box of tricks to pull out in England.
Here.
If there were 5 million on the streets against David Cameron, well then Ed Miliband will be in power tomorrow.
Yes.
Simple as that.
Yes, that's an early election.
And then Ed Miliband but first, Ed Miliband will attend the demonstration of 5 million.
Yes.
He will stand up and say, I hear your voice, you haven't listened hard enough, I will represent you, I will stand up for you, vote Labour tomorrow, and Labour will come to power.
Yes.
Or they'll remove David Cameron, or David Cameron will say, Ed Miliband, you come to power, I'm resigning.
Yes.
I think you're wrong, Heiko.
Because where you find that it's growing is UK.
Well,
You know, and I can see
that's not what I was discussing. You've only just appeared.
Yes.
It's not fair to say that, because what we were talking about was the dynamics of mass movements.
But they've got the dynamics, that's what I'm trying to say. You know, they've gone from 0 to 25%.
Well,
That's not dynamic.
the potentiality for that as a parallel might exist. I don't deny that might exist, but if that were to exist, and if it does exist, it will be similar to what we're seeing with Morsi in Egypt. In other words, someone suddenly rises up, apparently representing the people, pretending to be a person of the people, with slogans to represent, you know, the more reactionary sections, you know, don't have too many immigrants, votes too full, and all the rest of it. Then, after a period of time, 6 months, 1 year, people turn around and say, well, he hasn't made it any better, has he? Doesn't help not having any polls here, does it? So how, if he can't improve the real conditions of the masses, then he will lose his authority just as surely as Morsi lost his authority. I mean, there they had, this guy, Farage, or whatever his name is. Farage. I mean, he doesn't have any religious argument to make. At least Morsi had worked in the underground.
It's a protest for
They'd worked in the underground. They were considered to be,
Islamists.
in inverted commas, Islamic revolutionaries. They came to power. Godly. They have all the peasants behind them, in theory. But the reality is, if they can't meet the social needs of the masses, down they go. And so that's an important lesson. And that's something that, you know, the British, there isn't a British politician of any caliber who has that influence.
Yes.
You know, there isn't any. But history if it creates a vacuum, it creates also leadership to represent that concept, you know.
Like the youth in Egypt, isn't it?
There will be in Egypt, but they started to mention, in some newspapers, revolutionary factions.
Yes.
They started to talk about this.
Yes.
Why? Because they were the factions who mobilised in 2011, and they're the people who organised last week to mobilise the protest demonstrations. They don't control the movement, but they are able to initiate it and to carefully work out the slogans and demands that mobilise the masses on the streets. And those are social demands, not religious, social demands. The needs of the masses, their stomach and their brains, to make them satisfied as human beings. And everybody knows, you know, you can craft out of the earth wonders, you know. I mean, after all, the Egyptians know that more than any, you know. A slave society can produce wonders, but where's the benefit for the masses? And if you look at the wonders that Egyptian capitalism creates, they're not even as good as the wonders of Egyptian slavery. So how can they claim to be supreme rulers over the people? Millions and millions of people take to the streets and protest. They're demanding social transformation of their conditions. In that way, it's quite reasonable what they've said in some of the newspapers. This is a revolution as much as the beginnings of the Russian Revolution, 1905 or 1917. And it's part of a global process of transformation that's affecting, you know, one region after another, one country after another. You had, don't forget, as a chronology of the last years, you had a social protest movement in Spain, protest movements all around the world called the Occupy movement. Then you had the Arab Spring. Then you had one country after another. Then you had Turkey. Then you had Brazil. Then you have Egypt. They are not religious movements. They are social movements integrating together the same questions, the same issues that the masses are confronted with all around the planet. And those are the conditions and livelihoods of the working classes and the poor. 225 individuals in the world own more wealth than half of the world's population. During the global economic crisis, those people's wealth has gone up, whilst the majority of the world's population's living standards has gone down. That's the background.
Selling you McDonald's and KFC.
Yes,
you can make that, can't you?
Of course. That's the real background to what we're seeing in Egypt, the revolution we're seeing in Egypt, and the revolutionary movements we're seeing in many parts of the world.
Which brings us, we have to make a petition, you and I, you have to ask millions of people to come to Trafalgar Square and overthrow this guy.
The time will come. In my opinion, we're not there yet in Britain. There are people who think we are, but I don't think we are. But
You can
The truth
initiate.
of the matter is, things can be transformed quite quickly. A few days ago, I called a little thing here. Eric was the only person who came along. A couple of other people came, and I spoke to a little crowd that gathered here about the spying scandal. I lived in East Germany in the old days, before the Berlin Wall was taken down, and I've got a record from the Stasi that they had me under observation and so on, the secret police. And the Stasi at that time, I remember everyone used to say, oh look, they've got secret police in East Germany. They watch what everyone does. They report on them. They've got films about it, the lives of others and the Cold War films and all that. But in the last 4 weeks, it's been revealed, the Western intelligence services, the British being the worst of all, have been tapping, the British in particular, have been collecting all electronic communication in the world. So everything, all of you, ever sent
Not
by
only Abu
email.
Hamza,
by
but
email, telephone, all communication.
Not only Abu
collected.
Hamza,
No,
but
that's
everyone.
right, everybody. All of you.
No,
And this is supposed to be against terrorism.
Yes.
Well, I mean,
Am I a terrorist?
well, this is the assumption is by collecting everybody's data, we can mine who the terrorist is.
Yes.
Well, but what if it's not for terrorism? You know, this is being collected en masse without our permission,
Yes.
without legal rights.
You know what they say?
And when the guy exposes this,
He's arrested. He's
he's called a traitor,
and a warrant.
wanted for espionage, can face the death penalty, and no country in the world offers him a passport.
Venezuela.
And when the Bolivian leader is suspected of having him in his aeroplane, the European Union
Landis him.
kidnaps him
Yes.
in Austria for 72 hours and searches his aeroplane. If that would happen in Latin America to David Cameron, the British fleet would be mobilised and the Air Force would be mobilised to bomb the country that did it. And so basically what we have is an apparatus of surveillance never before seen in human history, incorporating corporations who call themselves benign, Google, Facebook, Yahoo, all these great, Microsoft, all these corporations who are on everyone's fingertips. These corporations are watching everything you do. The British government is working to collect everything you ever say to anybody. And we're supposed to say, yes, imprison the man and kill him. We actually think, most people actually think, that guy's a hero, exposing how these crooks are stealing not only our information, but all our personal secrets and life.
What have you got to hide?
What haven't you got to hide?
You've got your private
What do
life
they
to
need to know?
got your private
Yeah, I mean, there was someone demonstrated on Thursday. He had a sign up and he said, "NSA, stop looking at my penis." And there's a certain truth in that. You know, what has it got to do with them? Who you communicate, what you communicate, where you communicate. The East Germans didn't used to watch people like that. The East Germans, they used to have someone in the neighbourhood who would report on
Keeping an
you.
eye on you.
Yes, that's all.
Yeah.
They didn't have every single communication that you ever made collected by the
do
East
have
German
here.
secret police.
They do
This
have
is
here.
what they have here.
I've seen a big issue seller who's undercover.
Undercover police. Well, that's another game. Isn't
Big issue seller.
That's another game.
You know how I know that? The police came to the scene first. The first person they asked
him
the
off.
question is him. And I'm saying, how on earth this guy would know what's going on if he's begging for money?
maybe he gets a couple of quid off them. That's right.
Yes.
Why are spies brought down by these sexual peccadillos or something?
Sexual peccadillos bring down lots of people, not just spies.
But it's to deflect you about the real issues.
Yeah, because I mean,
The real issues are... Look,
peccadillos are always intriguing for the population. They make good news on the Sun newspaper and so on, and that is sufficient then sometimes to bring people down.
Listen,
you know, because a lot of them also claim to be pious. You know, it's like religious people. You know, claim to be
I'm a public
religious.
sector worker, and I will not get a pay rise. The parliamentarians will get pay rises. I and millions will be very unhappy, but we are giving a sideline story. This chap who's been sleeping with women, spying on them.
Oh, right, the policeman.
So
the
we will
policeman.
be busy about that instead of talking about...
Well, he's a public sector employee as well, though, isn't he?
Yeah, where is about our pay rises and
conditions.
Well, that's an important component. It always is. So on the other side,
Well, I'm saying they're going to get 10,000 quid.
we live in the world of ubiquitous pornography, where it's that single click away in pornography, isn't it? So
Yes.
because of that, it's infiltrated into the minds of the population. It's one of the factors keeping people relatively passive in modern times, as opposed to 1930s.
Like EastEnders.
That people, that's the two sides, EastEnders and pornography. The two things are closely connected together. Social pornography, sexual pornography.
And Saturday football games.
Would you agree that in society such as our own, a secular democratic society, a level of surveillance is acceptable? And if so, what level of surveillance? Where would you draw the line?
I think basically all data should belong to the person who submitted the data. So everything that you and I submit anywhere, electronically or our telephone communication, all that should belong to us as the creator, right? And it's not only created by us, it's created on our own machines. So when you enter the data, it's made on your machine, you press submit, it goes off onto another machine. But it's originated from your machine with your mind, your brain, your experience. No matter whether it's going, right mate, on the internet to someone, or whether it's writing, a thesis about relativity theory.
What if it's information that is relevant to the security of the country?
The second thing is, if the authorities have knowledge of some criminal activity as defined by the law, then they should have the right to get a warrant to get access to information. That's perfectly fine. The question is, what we have now is, first they collect all our information, and then they say you're a criminal. That's what's happened now, is that all information is now collected, and then whenever they want they can say you're a criminal. And not only that, but because of the degree of interconnection, criminal conspiracies can be completely constructed, completely manufactured. Just the same as that guy can go as a policeman and go and have it off with a number of women, then give out a leaflet saying which were libelled or supposedly libelled McDonald's. And McDonald's, there was a 4 or 5 year court case as a result of the leaflet written by this policeman. Well, if you have this on the internet and they're participating in these communications that you're in, then of course you can drag anybody into criminal conspiracy. There was a man who used to speak on my platform here at Speaker's Corner. His name is Mohammed Hamid. 3 years ago, he was hanging around Speaker's Corner. The police decided he might be a terrorist threat. He was actually invited by the BBC to participate in a program called Don't Panic, I'm Islamic. And on that, he was paid by the BBC to go paintballing in the forest. They used that in court against him to say he's a terrorist, what he did for the BBC. And then they said they had him recorded in his house. After a year and a half of recording his house and his car and his friends' houses and cars, they got one recording of him at breakfast time saying to his mates, C77, right, that's not even breakfast for me. That's what put him down for 7 years minimum in Belmarsh prison. That's all he said. Now, okay, it's not a good thing he said, it's a bad thing he said, but the truth of the matter is, I guarantee almost every one of you will have said something of a similar character. For example, Bob Marley wrote a song called, or sung a song called I Shot the Sheriff, but I Didn't Shoot the Deputy, right?
Yes.
Does that mean he wants people to go and shoot the sheriff? Lots of rappers make songs about shooting and killing people. Does that mean they want to incite people to shoot and kill them? No. So the idea that someone who says something that happens to be interpretable as a terrorist conspiracy is quite different from an actual terrorist conspiracy. And of course, then it's entirely about the selection. Who do you select and how? As will be under observation once you've already got all their information. Not only that, but people commit all sorts of minor infractions which can result in them. Take one example. When last week Evo Morales, president of Bolivia, flew over Europe.
Was hijacked.
The Spanish, the Portuguese, the French, and the Austrians hijacked the president of Bolivia and searched his plane against the law, against international law. But they did it. Why did they do it? I asked myself, why did they do it?
Nuclear power.
Because the Americans contacted the governments of Europe and said to them,
Get the gun.
you will bring this plane down. Now, if Francois Hollande turned around and said, oh, I don't want to do that, then the NSA turned around, I think the news story corresponded in time, the National Security Agency told Barack Obama, tell Francois Hollande that tomorrow we're going to release the news that the DSA, the French intelligence services, have collected all the data of the French. And that's what they did. When Hollande said, I'm sorry for arresting Evo Morales, next day the news came out, DSA has been watching all people in France. Even the Austrian Prime Minister and the French, and the Spanish and the Portuguese, probably they got a little phone call or an email or a text message that said, we know you're screwing so-and-so, or we know what you did in 1991 in this town when you managed to rig the election to get into power. If you want that to come out, you won't say anything and you'll bring the plane down. If you don't want that to come out, we'll bring the plane down. So in that way, they get acquiescence of governments all around the world to do what they want. When the German Prime Minister, or Chancellor, better say, Chancellor Merkel,
Yes.
when she received news that the British intelligence services have spied and collected the data of 50 million communications in Germany, the German Chancellor turns around and says, I'm going to write a letter to David Cameron. Write a bloody letter? Write a letter, 50 million communications stolen illegally in the European Union, and she's going to write a letter. Quite clearly, she's also under the control of the American intelligence services who know enough on her to bring her down. And that's the game. If they know sufficient on you, everything about you, everything you've ever said to anyone, then of course they can bring anyone down at any moment they like. And that's the game we're in at the moment. Unless you have, as I say, the events in Egypt or Turkey or Brazil, mass revolutionary unrest that is able to bring down those people who are so high and mighty that they think
Even Obama
that they
can't protect you that time.
Look, when Edward Snowden was arrested, was in Hong Kong, his first interview, he explained, when he was in the NSA, he was able to tap and access Barack Obama's emails. So it's not even Barack Obama in charge of the intelligence agencies, it's the intelligence agencies in charge in general,
Itself.
and Barack Obama an agent of those agencies, not the other way around. He doesn't decide what the NSA do, the NSA do it, and when they're exposed they can be questioned. But first they do, then they ask. You think GCHQ asked the government for a universal surveillance of everything?
No.
Even David Cameron would have been shocked at that and backed off. But as it is, they were able to do so without parliamentary or government permission. In fact, the Foreign Secretary was supposed to sign a piece of paper. Probably didn't even know he had 50 pieces of paper on the table. Sign that, the Secretary says sign that. Oh, they want some check-up on terrorism, sign that. So he signs it and that's it. So, most people are completely unaware of the dynamics of what's happened. And actually, the scale of what's happened, I'm absolutely certain most people in Britain have no idea about the scale of what's been happening. Every single communication you've made in the last year has been collected by the British government. Every single communication.
Or even on telephone.
Yes, everything.
Everything.
Even
Only
if you
face
speak
to face.
in
Just
another
hand
language.
yourself in.
Even if you
So
speak
what?
in another language.
Another language, what's the big
No
deal?
language. Shall I tell you my...
The BBC.
You know, it's a very
Why is the
interesting thing.
BBC a world service? In the 1940s, the BBC, in conjunction with a precursor to the CIA, they set up an agency which would monitor news from all around the world. They're in Caversham in England. They collect every radio and television broadcast in the world and translate it into English. They store all the data in all languages, and if they want to investigate you, they put a translator on it, electronic and human translator, who checks out what you've said.
And if they can't make out what you're saying, they will call you for an interview.
One more question.
Yes.
These calls are being monitored and recorded.
Yes.
You can't speak Punjabi, I'm afraid.
What
There's
came
a lot
out
of
from
Punjabi
Edward
speakers.
Snowden was that all electronic
Some of our
communication.
Pakistanis living here.
Yes.
Yes. All electronic communication, and that was the interesting thing. It was all electronic communication in the world is being collected by GCHQ.
One of our leaders is living in the UK who was making
Nawaz Sharif.
Not Nawaz Sharif.
Yeah.
Yeah, people complained about him to the British authorities,
Well,
and they were saying that his phone calls were recorded.
Yeah.
We have his call recorded.
The British intelligence services, of course, they always say,
He doesn't
or the
live in
Americans.
Central London, he's far away from Central London.
Well, that's no difference. It's just the electronic data, isn't it?
Yes.
If you collect all the electronic data, who cares where you live? As I said,
Every email you send has got a word post that goes through and looks for terrorist, bomb, president, and if they get those keywords, I sent a friendly email to a friend of mine, and it took 1 day to get there because I said how bad it is for Obama to not do this and all that, and it all got picked up, and it took 24 hours to get to my mate. But
ask yourself,
You know what
Protect
happened?
the public.
Yeah.
You know what happened after the election? Many people complained about our leader,
Yeah.
complained about that leader. The phone calls were made from Pakistan to the UK.
It's all monitored.
It's all
Yes.
monitored.
I look at
And you
it.
know what the British authority was saying?
but it's not
In
just
a
that.
way, we are
It's not just that. It's,
fortunate that England
one
has
second.
those kind of high skills.
It's not just that.
And
It's
we should be
also
proud of it.
that all communications in Pakistan are monitored by the British and collected by the British. Yes. All around the world.
Yeah, aren't we
Now-
lucky?
Sorry?
Aren't we lucky?
Right, yeah. So they said that the Chinese were hacking into their communication systems.
Every country does it.
Well,
Just more sophisticated they are, better they can
the
do
truth of the
it.
matter is, there are a lot of people who have now been saying in the newspapers, everyone knew this is going on. They didn't know it's going on. Most people still don't know it's going on, like the gentleman here.
Yeah.
Most people don't know it's going on. They haven't got a concept of the sheer scale of it. If you say, I listened to a radio show last night, there were some members of parliament were interrogating a journalist about this, and the members of parliament said, oh no, they're only collecting metadata. That's not true. They collected all data. Now, second point I wanted to make about this, what's the reason why they're doing this? Because the Western powers are fearful that they're losing their authority and power economically around the world.
Yes.
And the one area where they have superiority over China is on data and the internet. And so their objective is to create over and above companies like Google, Microsoft, Yahoo and Facebook, which connect together billions of people around the world. They want to have an agency funded by the state, which is effectively an electronic data agency, which just like you enter data, enter onto Google to find something out, they enter above that to find anything they want out. So the American intelligence services will, for example, work on behalf of Microsoft to make sure that Microsoft conquers the Chinese market.
And nobody competes with them.
Yeah, and
Well, the advantage the Chinese have got is the language, one, and second, that they don't allow most Western internet companies into China to operate effectively. So if you go onto Google in China, it barely works. So after a while, you stop using it and use something else. That's right. The truth of the matter is, in spite of their supposed iron hold over the internet, Facebook, Google and so on, actually they're probably just temporary phenomena. Because all of them can be subsumed into something else.
Yes.
Some of you might remember MySpace. It was only 3 years ago. It was a big thing.
Yes.
No one even knows what it is now, right?
one more question.
Oh, Bebo, that's right. Bebo was sold for 600 million a few years ago, and last week was sold for £1.
Facebook and Twitter are being monitored as well.
Yes, all Facebook and Twitter is collected by the intelligence services.
Careful.
By the British intelligence services
Shelton.
and given to the Americans.
Yeah, one more question. It's not, I don't want to get into a political discussion. In our country, Pakistan, many political leaders like Imran Khan and all and Pervez Musharraf, they've made their pages on Facebook and people are liking it. Do the British know about that as well?
Yes, everything. all electronic communication in the world. I repeat.
Like if I'm an ordinary person and I make
Doesn't matter. Yes, anything you click like, click don't like, click this, click that, type in this search, type in that search, type in this. All of it collected by the intelligence services. So what sort of democracy is that?
Everything that goes on this.
Everything you do in relation to the external world monitored by the secret services. They're not called secret services for nothing. Well, they're not so secret
But the funny
anymore.
thing is, they recruit also Abu Hamza and the likes.
It's the other side to it.
Yeah.
They're human intelligence.
So I tell you, I'm a Muslim. I went in to Abu Hamza's ceremony. I didn't know the guy for this. Went into the mosque. The way he was speaking and what he was saying during and after the sermon. Came out and scratching my head. I say one sentence.
It takes so long to
I would not see the sun for years. Well, the guy was free.
Sometimes you find they'll put someone up, they're allowed to be either encouraged or allowed.
And see who's working under him.
And then, of course, who does he recruit? You know, who does he recruit? And then they watch over them.
Yes.
If you don't have, I mean, I've been on a demonstration once in Berlin.
Yes.
May Day 1987. Go on the demonstration. At the end of the demonstration, it was in a big square in Mariannplatz in Berlin. And then some great big guys with masks on, you couldn't see who they were, they ran and smashed up the windows to a number of shops. Then people ran down there to find out what was going on, and the police shot tear gas into the crowd. Then they shot tear gas all over the place into the crowd. And then they let people attack their vans. Their vans were a bit battered up. Then they had battered vans on the newspaper headlines. Chaos and rebellion breaks out in Kreuzberg. Actually, it was organised by the police.
Yes.
These were agents of the police agents in masks, initiating the unrest, because they know the tinderbox is there. If you initiate it, if you cause a spark, then people will go out and follow. So often, intelligence agencies' operations are like that. The other side of the operation is dual side. On the one side, in the old days, they used to have an ideological training which would lead them to think, I'm against communism. And so they would train them up to be agents who would fight communism and the communist threat. Nowadays, they don't have that many people who speak Arabic.
Communist first.
The communist element is quite weak in society, and the ideological control is also weak. So generally, these are just paid people who do a job that they're told to do because they think, I'm going to do my job. Right? Makes them disloyal. That's why people like Ed Snowden can appear, and other people who leak this type of information out. It also means that they've shifted their emphasis away from what they call human intelligence agencies to data intelligence. Primarily because they knew there's a shift towards software as the dominant factor in world economy, and therefore if they can dominate software into eternity, then they will be able to control those countries, like for example China, which is based on production of real goods rather than information side of production. So for that reason, it's important strategic orientation. It started really a long time ago, but really under George Bush Senior and Bill Clinton. This was a major focus of intelligence operations. 40% of the US budget under CIA budget under Clinton went towards information warfare. So they shifted the balance away from James Bonds and so on towards the collection of data and the sifting of data. Well, they wanted to create what they call a knowledge engine, which is basically like a search engine that mirrors the structure of organizations. So for example, if you want to crash the Japanese stock market, you have to know how it's structured, what its weak points are, and then you can feed information, even if it's only for 20 seconds, to undermine, for example, Japanese car industry. So in that way, you can shift the balance of forces economically in your favour. And that's the ultimate objective, of course, of the American intelligence agency operation, is to create supercomputers and super software mechanisms, knowledge engines, which allow them to dominate the global internet and collect data on anything and access discrete data from any corner of the internet to allow them to control the dynamic of events. If you know all the plans of your enemies in advance, you never need to fight another war. That's what Frederick the Great used to say, and there's a certain truth to it, that if you're capable of knowing the projects in advance, then you can do. The problem is the masses. How will the masses respond? I think actually when people begin to click about what's going on in relation to this surveillance state, they begin to click. It just takes time. It might seem silly. Some people know exactly what's going on now. They think, bloody hell, why aren't people protesting? But actually, it takes time for people to follow what's actually been taking place. Events are happening very rapidly around the world. Last week, for example, we had the biggest demonstrations in human history in Egypt. These were the biggest demonstrations in the history of the world. And they provoked a revolutionary overthrow of the government.
One more question, about our country, whatever is happening.
I've been to Pakistan a few times actually.
Yeah. Like the elections, all the elections were rigged in Pakistan. These corrupt politicians rigged the elections. Yeah. Do the authorities know about that as well?
Of course. I mean, the data is collected. What they do with it is another thing. The truth of the matter is, Pakistan, like Egypt, is a country in which the military dominates society. Right? 40% of the economy, perhaps even 60% in Pakistan, is owned by the military.
People haven't come out on the streets as yet.
It's the nature of Pakistan, a very divided country. Lots of different communities, nationalities, languages. It's that historical background. People did take to the streets in the past.
In Egypt, people came out on the streets.
Yes, the potential for them taking the streets in Pakistan is probably there as well. But the question is, it must be around demands not of religion, but of the needs of the masses, their living standards, their conditions. These are the unifying forces, not only in Egypt, but across the entire planet. People think when they go on the street in Turkey, they think, they raise the Turkish flag, and then they say, down with, Erdogan, down with Erdogan, he's becoming too Islamist. Then in Brazil, people take to the streets, they say, we don't want to spend so much money on the World Cup, we want social programs. In Egypt, they take to the streets, they say, where is the benefit for the people from the revolution? So in other words, the common factor in all these mass unrests is the social issues of the masses, which are world affairs, world revolutionary questions.
How does a revolution come? You need a big force to bring in a revolution.
You need the mass of the people prepared to take to the streets. That we have seen in the last week, in the last few weeks, and in countries around the world over the last 3-4 years. On the other side, you also need, instead of what happened in Egypt in the last week, where the masses take to the streets and the military intervenes, claiming that they're representing the masses. Instead of this, we need the masses to take control of the military, split the army, win the majority of the soldiers to their side, and create a revolutionary government from the will of the people, not from above by the army, but from below, to take control of society and the state.
In Pakistan, what a revolution, how it can come. You need a third force to break the status quo in Pakistan, they say. What I've been saying.
I've been in Pakistan a few times, and my own experience is this: you go on to a meeting in Pakistan, and the people will shout out, I think it's roti chenai. What is it?
Roti kapra makan.
Roti kapra makan.
Food, clothes, and home.
Food, clothes, and housing. The people would chant this out. It's a natural slogan to them. So this is not Islam. This is the same question across the whole world, right? But the problem is that you also have a long feudal tradition or semi-feudal tradition
that needs to come to
where you have large, like the Bhutto family. The Pakistan People's Party is supposed to be a people's party. But the Bhutto family, they own huge swathes of land and they're landowners.
Yeah.
So the consequence of that is that instead of having a political party stemming from the will of the people, you have a political party like the People's Party controlled by a family. They treat it like their personal possession.
And you know what?
Bhutto, when she left her will, she said, I leave the party to my son. Leave the party to her son. The party is supposed to be the will of the people in that party. If the People's Party was a democratic party, representing the will of the People's Party supporters, then Roti Makan Chennai would be the dominant slogan of the masses.
And one more thing, these people have failed 2 or 3 times. They've ruled the country and they've failed to deliver to the people of Pakistan. And you know what? In our country, honest people are not being respected. And you know, one case similar to Pervez Musharraf, who left the bed of roses to serve the country, but they didn't let him come to power.
You will find that the same dynamic take place in all countries. In Britain, for example, we have a Labour Party supposed to represent the people. What does it do? It attacks the people. The people that select a member of Parliament, they don't want it. They want somebody appointed by Tony Miliband or Ed Blair.
One more question. In the United States, nobody can be the president more than twice, they say. In the United States.
Well,
In
not
Britain,
nobody.
it's the same,
Not
no?
nobody. If you're wealthy, you can meet the Prime Minister. There's probably a
Hey, I'm
chart
talking
that they've got.
I'm
How much you
comparing UK
pay
to the
for how
US.
long you get to spend with the Prime Minister or the President. Because after all, ask yourself this. The Prime Minister earns £150,000, £160,000 a year, I think maybe a bit more than that maybe nowadays.
We're not talking about his wealth.
But, no, 1 minute. But Tony Blair was earning that money. If you go to an estate agent, they give you 3 times income. 3 times joint income to buy a house. Tony Blair's his joint income was about £500,000 a year, but he bought a house 3.5 million. So, evidently the same rules don't apply. They can acquire wealth, enormous wealth, all around the world. Now they go and do speaking tour. They go one speech, £100,000. One speech, £100,000.
You know
Think
what?
of the money I'd have.
Well, one of our leaders is a lecturer.
Yeah.
Pervez Musharraf. You've heard about him, no?
I don't agree with Musharraf.
But Heiko, you know, you talk about...
He was the army boy. He was the army boy who did the
But
game before.
he was a brave leader.
But Heiko, you talk about the
I don't
working...
agree.
Heiko, you talk about the working conditions being the main factor and now surveillance being the main factor in change. But it's generally speaking the middle class is losing their money that is really the trigger for change.
That is because the middle class's acquiescence and support is necessary for the reproduction of the system. Just like a human being must produce children to reproduce the system of their family, so a society, a system of society must reproduce the workers, the middle class, the upper class.
The workers are very
Just let me clarify this. It's not about a moral position. You asked me a scientific question, not a moral question.
No.
The scientific question of the reproduction of the existing class structure is a very important question. If the economy is in crisis, as it is, then the scope for expanding the living standards of the majority and of the middle class is declining. So the middle class will have less money, the working class will have less money, the upper stratum, their money is increasing all the time. The consequence of that is the crisis for reproducing the system leads, as you said earlier, to a discontented, educated middle class who feel that they normally would have inherited higher positions, but now they're having to reduce their expectations. That tends in history to lead to revolutionary explosion, because it's basically revealing the inability of the social system to reproduce itself. Unless the middle class is expanding, the system is losing its influence. And therefore, the reason I talk about the workers is because the core of the production of wealth is the work of the working class.
And one more question. One person who has no governing experience, he should not join politics, right?
Well, I don't know about governing experience. They'll tell you all the time, governing is difficult. Governing is only difficult because you're oppressing and organising the oppression. If you're not organising oppression, then you can have people who are governing, who are elected by the people to do the will of the people.
One more question. You've heard about our ex-cricket player Imran Khan, who's always on TV and all.
Well, you're asking me a lot of questions about your country and who you think should be, who I think should be the leader. I've been in Pakistan a couple of times. I am a socialist, a revolutionary socialist. I believe that Pakistan, like many other countries, requires a revolutionary transformation in which the mass of the people, the urban inhabitants and the peasants, should control the destiny of their country themselves by democratically elected representatives, recallable at any time to the people, and not receiving high wages, but receiving wages to supervise activity on behalf of the people, and if they don't do it, change the people. Rather than having dynasties, is what you've got in Pakistan, dynasties controlling, or the military controlling.
Hierarchies.
Or the military controlling. Same in Pakistan, same in Egypt, same throughout most of the Middle East. It's because the reason you have this particular balance, it's not because Middle Eastern people or Pakistani people are inferior, can't create systems of government that work. It's because imperialism, by that I mean British, European, American imperialism, dominated the world and created it in its image and maintained these countries economically repressed. They kept the landowning class in power, they kept the military in power, they kept the religious leaders and the kings sometimes in power, and thereby they created no, if you like, democratic, revolutionary capitalist class. And so because of that, most countries after 1945 never reached a middle level income. Most countries in the world.
Let's talk about the working class. Let's talk about the...
Why do we still have a queen in London? Because the British government, as I said, conquered the world, plundered the world, and with sufficient wealth at their disposal, created bread and circuses for the masses, which included bolstering the strength of the monarchy in case, in times of crisis, they fear there might be no one to turn to. The Egyptians have got a few generals in the army who can speak radical. If social crisis breaks out in Britain, the monarchy has reserved powers to remove the government and impose another. She can call the government and remove the government. Exactly, it's Her Majesty's government. And so Her Majesty, the Queen of England, can dissolve the government just the same as the look. It takes 20 or 30 million Egyptians to dissolve the government of Morsi. It takes one queen in England to dissolve the government in England. That's how it is. That's constitutionally right.
During one of the issues we had with fuel, and a lot of the fuel places were barricaded in and they couldn't get the fuel out on the streets, that the government had to go to the Queen and ask permission to fire on those people outside those places. They weren't allowed to take that decision without the Queen's authority.
Yeah, they can do that, yeah. I don't know. It depends. The Queen's authority is required for all acts of Parliament, basically.
To actually fire on people.
All major decisions, yeah. Was that
Russia, with the riot action, do that anyway. Read the riots happened.
Fire.
Well, it wasn't a riot, they were just blocking traffic
Prime
coming
Minister
out.
also has the power
And they
to
weren't
make
rioting.
decisions, right?
But to get them
Prime
out of the
Minister
way.
has power to make decisions, but
fuel tank.
To dissolve the Parliament as well, right?
Yeah.
no, the Prime Minister must go to the Queen
Coming through, they were going to
ask her
them out
permission.
the way of them.
Normally she grants, but there are some circumstances maybe she won't grant. We don't know.
Bullets flying around in the hole
Yep.
finally. It's
I
very
don't think they
dangerous.
see it like that.
Yep, what is it?
Had that as-
Right? Yeah.
They just had that as an alternate if there was some trouble.
Yeah.
Why does the Queen not let anyone in her garden? Because in order to have the appearance of mystique, of totem, they have to have some special image that they're superior to everyone. And one component of that is if you go through London, you'll see lots, big houses, even the elite, Berezovsky and all that, they've got a big house, garden maybe 2 acres, 3 acres. But in London, one house, huge garden, right? And so you can say, here look, she deserves it, she's powerful, she's got mystique, she can hold a garden party, she can invite in and refuse permission. She is the supreme being, So because of that, it enhances her prestige and power to have, a large garden. You want to go in there, is it? Jump over the wall! You better not. Yeah, you'll get in big trouble. Yeah, you will. You will. Once upon a time, a few years ago, well, more than a few years ago, a man broke in there. He climbed into the building, got through the garden, sat on, was it the Queen's bed?
Yeah.
Sat on the Queen's bed having a chat to her. But he was an idiot. You know, a mad monarchist, which I hope you won't become.
I would want to go into politics soon.
You don't want to what?
I want to serve my country soon.
Good. Make revolution, my friend. Look at what's happening in Egypt. That's what your country needs. Honestly, I've been to Pakistan. If you go to Pakistan, honestly, it's sad. Because here is a country with enormous natural wealth. Enormous. I mean, everything grows everywhere. You go into Punjab, it's just green. And then you wonder, why were the British there? I went to the mountains, Murray and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Went up there, beautiful, like Switzerland, you know. And unspoiled, like Switzerland, beautiful. People very cultured. A lot of the people come up to you and goes, the guy comes up to me in a meeting, he only had one eye. Obviously he didn't have the medical operation. Comes up to me, one eye, he comes and goes like, have you read Keats? And I said, Keats? Have you read Keats? They're all into poetry out there, you know.
Keats, I think I've read.
You lucky. I didn't mean you. He said that to me.
Yeats, poetry, yes.
Yeats, they're all obsessed with poetry, you see.
I even given
Poetry, literature.
an exam about it.
Right, exactly. We don't do that. Yeah. We just give it to you to do. And so,
Poem on love. No.
so the potentiality in the wealth and culture of the people is very great. The problem is, because of the political balance and economic balance of power, these countries are deliberately held backwards from developing. Take the first example of Pakistan. What is Pakistan? Pakistan is an artificial creation of the British in conjunction with a few stooges. Yes, but you should have never have split up India. The people of India should be one. Then you wouldn't have so much of this really. How many people? Half
Even if they don't want to
a
be
million
one.
people? Sorry?
Even if they don't want to be one.
But the fact of the matter is the people were manipulated by the British to turn against them. That's the truth of the matter. They feared revolution, and then to divert the revolution, they start talking about nationalism and lean on this, on Gina, you know.
And one more question.
You keep saying that one more question.
UK, there's asylum been given to our political leaders. Many of them migrate to the UK after.
Yeah.
That is true.
Well, this is for the very simple reason. The British have always had it, because the British were a powerful imperialist power. Number one in world history, only 1947. The biggest empire in the history of the world was Britain. With England, actually Britain itself is itself part of an empire, England's empire, right? So, the English ruling class established its foothold everywhere, right? And then, when they had their foothold everywhere, they invite, if there's some trouble in Egypt, guarantee you, some of the Muslim Brotherhood will be given shelter in London. Just in case things turn the other way, then they send them back again. You know, when the Arab Spring started here, the Tunisian one of the leaders of the Tunisian opposition, I remember going to a meeting, he stood there, big beard, he says, long live the Russian Revolution. Funny thing to say. He says, long live the Iranian Revolution. I thought, even more funny thing to say. He goes, long live the Tunisian Revolution. And everyone was in the audience was like this, bewildered. And then the point was, he was a man of all winds. Whatever way the wind blew, he would go.
I've read this in history.
Because once they have power, they could manipulate people and control. That was the idea Morsi had. But actually, they were unable to do it because the economic question is the fundamental.
I've read.
Bread is the foundation. Roti chenai, what's it, makan? Roti chenai makan, as you say. Food, shelter,
And
comfort, and what?
Housing.
And housing. These fundamentals are the basis for which modern revolutionary change is being demanded. Look at Brazil. What are they saying? This is the football mania country, right? Bread and circuses, they love it. That's it. Pele and all the rest. Ronaldinho.
Britishers have
Now the people take to the streets and say, why should we have multi-millionaires running around kicking a football when the people don't have school, healthcare, education, healthcare, welfare, housing, living in favelas in the mountains for decades on end? Why should these millionaires and billionaires rule over the country? That consciousness is developing to a world consciousness.
The potential that's revealed by the Arab Spring, Spanish revolts, Turkish revolts, the Brazilian revolts, the Egyptian revolution of the last few days reveals the potentiality for a world revolution to create a world of peace, freedom and plenty in harmony with the ecology. Thank you very much for listening. I'll begin later.
Bye-bye.